So, what do you always take with you when you travel on these to these remote areas?
There are many, many answers to that, which one can vary. But I think the most important one is a local.
A local.
Take a local, travel with a local, do what they
Oh,
do,
of
and
course,
do it
yeah.
like them. Take nothing.
Take
But,
nothing. Travel light.
travel light.
Hello, I'm Catherine Fairweather. Welcome to the third act. This week, I'm delighted to sit down with explorer and environmentalist Robin Hanbury-Tenison. Now in his 9th decade, with a lifetime of experience behind him, we get together at Oriens to talk about his Swallows and Amazons childhood, his first forays into exploring, and a recent near-death experience through COVID. Welcome, Robin. It's so fantastic to see you all the way from Cornwall. It's not quite such an arduous journey as crossing the Amazon, I suppose, but you've just come from your 2,000-acre farm in... Is it a 2,000-acre farm?
It was.
It's no longer.
All the way to my oldest son. It was only moorland. It's very rough land. It's only 300 acres left, which I've given to Merlin.
Well, let's start, not at the beginning, actually, in your case, because what I would really like to do is start at this last period of your life, because in a sense, this is your third act, the coming back from the brink of death, if I can put it so sensationally, is something that I'm really interested in, because not many people can have had such a near-death experience and live to tell the tale. So tell us, it was the beginning of COVID, and you were on a skiing holiday, and you came back and felt...
Skiing holiday came just after the beginning. The beginning was the launch of my new book on 15th of February 2020. I launched my latest book, Taming the Four Horsemen, in which on page 4 I say there is about to be a massive global pandemic. And that was just luck, because I'd done a bit of research and it was quite obvious it was going to happen. And only to find that 4 weeks later, I was virtually the first person to go down really badly with it, and spent 5 weeks in a coma, induced coma, on a tracheotomy and kidney dialysis and ventilators and everything, while they experimented on me with massive drugs, so that I was in a totally hallucinogenic state all that time.
Do you remember anything about that period?
Only the hallucinations. It's extraordinary. You don't remember any of the indignities and all the other nasty things that must have been going on while I was in that state. But I do vividly remember the hallucinations, because, which, funnily enough, I thoroughly enjoyed, because having spent a lot of time with shamans in various parts of the world in tropical rainforests, who would induce the same sort of state through
ayahuasca,
hallucinogens. I'd seen them enter the spirit world, become a serpent or a jaguar or whatever. And so for me, it was very, very interesting, because hospital is so boring that actually having wonderful dreams, seeing bats climbing up my saline drip and a big jaguar walk past that I could lean out and stroke, and big snakes come over the bottom of my bed, was fascinating. It really made life bearable.
People say that often in they lead a completely alternative life in that state of half-life.
I was aware of entering spirit worlds. There was a little white wicket gate that I could open and go into another one.
How extraordinary.
And I saw the white tunnel with the beckoning hands at the end. I mean, I was that close to it. 3 times they rang up my wife and said, prepare for a difficult conversation. He's got less than 5% chance of making it. And if he does, he'll be severely brain damaged.
Your poor wife.
And she said, well, just give it another try. He's a tough old bird. And they couldn't get me out of the coma. They'd done so many dreadful things to me that one day it just happened to be in the only hospital, literally the first hospital in Britain, Derriford in Devon, which had a healing garden attached to the intensive care unit. And I was the second person to be wheeled down into it with tubes sticking out of everywhere. And as I was wheeled in and the sun hit my face and I smelt the flowers, I woke up and, pressing my tracheotomy tube, I croaked, I think I'm going to live. And I did. And it was all filmed by lovely nurses. And so that, because I was the first to come through against all the odds, it achieved enormous international publicity. I had every news agency in the world wanting to do it. And then they made a BBC film about it, which went viral. And it was an amazing story. All just because I was the first. And I survived.
Yeah, I remember it very well. But it also had the effect of reaffirming your faith in something that you've believed in all your life.
Well, it was an idea that I'd always had, but I'd never really wanted to talk about it because it's a bit wacky to talk about the healing power of nature. But now, as a manifest example of it, I can, because it worked for me. And amazingly, I have no post-COVID. And 5 months after the 5 weeks I was in hospital, because it takes a month for every week that you're in intensive care to get better, I raised 150,000 by climbing Cornwall's highest mountain. It's only a pimple, but it's quite difficult when you've just come off a Zimmer frame, and raised that so that Cornwall's hospital should have a healing garden too. And eventually, having waded through all the NHS bureaucracy, we now have a wonderful healing garden in Cornwall's hospital.
Oh, fantastic.
And so good things come out of
When you were in your coma, flying around with the bats and whatever you were doing in your extraordinary multicolored dreams, at any point did the idea of death, confronting death, did it not seem so bad? Did it seem okay? Or maybe you didn't even think that
It seemed like a very pleasant option. I do remember serious dreams in which Merlin and I, my son and I, were in this particular world and had decided that we had the answers to everything, and the answer was to switch it all off. And that would have meant switching myself off. It appeared like switching the world off. And then we said, well, let's give it another chance. And I think probably if I'd decided to switch off, it would have been curtains. But I can remember that very clearly.
You can. Mm. And have you ever had any other scrapes with near-death experiences on these many 30 expeditions you've been on? Have there been moments when you thought, oh, God, that was a close shave?
Well, funnily enough, that's completely different when you have a close shave on an expedition, because like everything in life, most expeditions are rather boring. It's a sort of drudgery and daily stuff. So you rather look forward to moments. And my reaction when those sort of things happen was, this is going to be good copy if I make it through, if I fall over the rapids or get attacked by crocodiles or whatever. So it's quite different to be thinking of good copy as opposed to...
Interesting you say that. I have the same feeling. So does that mean you're a writer first and an explorer second? Because everything you do you can channel into great copy, or is it the other way around? You
Interesting. I'd like to think so. I certainly am not an explorer because I'm incredibly tough or anything like that. Not like Rand Fiennes. I don't cut my fingers off and do terribly brave things. I'd like to think that writing was more a motivation than showing off.
So, God, I love... We should start at the beginning, because actually, when did you get an inkling that you might follow a career as an explorer? Were you always reading about explorers as a child? Were you an adventurous little boy?
I grew up in a wonderful, wild, wooded place in Ireland, where my family grew up. And from the age of 6, my very irresponsible mother allowed me to sleep alone on an island in the lake with my dachshund. So I discovered solitude and fear very early on. And I led a sort of swans and Amazons existence as a child, which was wonderful, rowing back across the lake with my dachshund swimming and otters joining us and things like that.
Did you have no playmates?
My siblings were much older than me and away at the war, being soldiers and wrens and things. So I wasn't close to any of my siblings. I was a lonely child. My mother was a remarkable woman, an amazing painter, fantasist, magician, and a great ornithologist as well. And she taught me a lot about nature. And I was very close to her. But no, it was a weird upbringing. I mean, I remember one of the first little poems she taught me. She taught me masses of poems. One of them was, I wish I liked the human race, I wished I liked its silly face. And when I'm introduced to one, I wish I thought, what jolly fun. Which is a kind of cynical attitude to life. But in fact, I'm very gregarious when I'm with people, but I'm also very solitary when I'm alone, which is a nice contract to be
very wonderful.
Contrast to be able to live with.
Very wonderful, because you are a writer, and so you have to be alone a lot of the time. And so when you were on your little island in your Swallows and Amazons childhood, I suppose that must have fed your imagination. You imagined yourself being a brave explorer.
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't think it quite that clear that I knew what I was going to do. But I certainly wanted to run away from the real world.
Did you?
Because I was sent away to terrible schools in England, which were
At 7?
8.
Cruel, cruel, isn't it? Oh,
Cruel, cruel. And
God.
it was Tom Brown school days
Oh, my
when being
goodness.
small and pretty and rebellious was
Oh,
not a good idea. But
no.
it taught me the sort of Colditz syndrome that, the prisoners in Colditz had mostly been to Eton. And they all said that life in Colditz was nothing like as bad as it had been
That's
in
right.
school.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It trains you to be
Resilient.
yeah, resilient.
If you survive, not everybody does.
No, people are damaged as
Yeah.
well, and
Seriously
and
damaged.
emotionally bruised and unable to communicate properly
Quite
with
right.
the opposite sex.
Yeah.
But that's another story. But so you went to Eton, and did you loathe Eton, or did you
Hated it.
Did you?
Yeah. I love it now. I've given all my artifacts to the museum there, and I go and talk there, and it's a wonderful school and marvellous people there. But mine was a particularly bad era where the boys ruled the roost and took it out on the little boys, and it wasn't any fun.
And so you escaped. You were constantly escaping in your imagination then, imagining yourself running away to a different part of the world,
Well, to my island.
to your island, which was your safe haven, was it, your
My
island?
safe haven. Yeah.
Is it still there, that house?
Yes. No, the house isn't. The tree house is gone, but the island's still there.
Do you ever visit it?
Haven't for quite a while, but I will do more.
Well, your mother sounds wonderful for igniting these inspirations.
She was amazing and inspiring.
And so then after Eton, you went to Oxford and you read what?
Life changed completely when I went to Oxford because having really disliked my fellow human beings pretty consistently, had not very many friends. Suddenly at Oxford I found there were people who thought like I did and actually enjoyed poetry, and you weren't a sort of wet or a sap by wanting to talk about esoteric things. And sitting up all night talking about anything under the sun was one's education at Oxford. I did absolutely no work. I was a complete layabout going to parties. But I did associate with very intelligent people, and I hope some of it rubbed off. And it was a great era when people like A.J.P. Taylor and Maurice Barring were there. Not my tutors, but I used to go to their lectures with my friends, my great friends, lifelong friends, who were very much more intelligent than I was, and one hoped.
What were you reading at Oxford?
Very little. I kept changing.
Did you?
Philosophy mostly.
Okay. And so you got your degree. You managed to scrape through, did you?
Yes, I did get a degree. I got the letters after my name, but with no justification at all. And but I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life at all, except probably run away, escape.
And did you?
Yes.
So when? How? And how
Well,
did you make it happen?
The day I left Oxford, I got in with a friend from Ireland into a Second World War Jeep, which we bought for £100, battle-scarred old thing, and decided to do the first overland from London to Ceylon. Somebody had done previously the year before, Adrian Cowell and others had driven to Singapore overland, which has never been done since. Everybody's done London to India. In 1957, it was it hadn't been done before, and so we went through wonderful country, through Iran, crossing the Persian desert, driving all over Afghanistan, which was glorious in those days, getting kidnapped by rebels for a little bit, but they let us go, and driving right down. And then I sold the Jeep, and Johnny went home, and I wandered on around the world, working on ships and hitchhiking and
Sort of bumming around.
I was a very early hippie. But again, stuff was rubbing off. I went to Pagan and wandered around the temples there. I had Angkor Wat all to myself. There was not a single other tourist there. I spent a week
lucky you.
on a pedal bike doing all that. I travelled in Borneo and visited tribes, worked my passage across the Pacific. And my great friend Richard Mason wrote to me at one point and he said, "You'll be too blasé to want to do this, but we did have this plan." He and John Hemming and I, at 4:00 in the morning, when we should have been writing essays, had decided that we were going to be explorers. Didn't know really what it meant, but we were going to be explorers. That was our decision in life. And we all did become. John became director of the Royal Geographical Society and the most distinguished historical explorer of South America. And Richard and I decided that the last big journey that had never been done was to cross South America at its widest point in a jeep. Not a good idea anymore nowadays, but then it seemed like a good idea. And we set out a 6,000-mile journey heading due west from the easternmost point, Recife. It's not very convenient driving across Brazil because all the rivers run from south to north, and we were going from east to west.
Yeah.
But we did it, and we arrived the other end.
What did you learn? What did you learn out of that? That you could do it, I suppose.
Well, yes, we were recognised with a small award from the Royal Geographical Society as sort of proper explorers. But we visited a lot of Indians because we were right on the frontier and were contacted and relatively uncontacted Indians all the way, and we were very interested in them and we received enormous hospitality, both from the Indians and from, indeed, the settlers in the interior. And that was the beginning of feeling that something should be done about
Was
them.
it? Yeah.
And then Richard went back on a big expedition with John Hemming and tragically got killed by Indians, ambushed by an uncontacted group and beaten to death. And that was a huge scandal, last Englishman to be killed by tribal people, and taught me a lot about how to deal with the media and the press, because everybody wanted to say we were idiots. And I was saying he wasn't actually. They were a proper scientific expedition. They were doing it all by the book. They had been reassured there were no uncontacted Indians in that area, unexplored part of Brazil. And it was just a tragic accident. But it kind of focused my mind subconsciously, I think. And he had the great mantra of General Rondon, Marshal Rondon, who had started the Brazilian Indian Protection Service and had done huge expeditions into the interior and met many Indians. And his mantra was, die if you must, but never kill. And that probably was why Richard was killed, because he was armed and could have defended himself. But anyway, we don't know. But the point is, it sowed a seed.
Well, it sowed a seed also because I suppose you could have gone the other way and decided, oh God, we mustn't meddle with other people's cultures and
well, I do agree with that. Leave them alone if they wish to be left alone. But when they are already being contacted and on the edge of civilization, then they should not be forced at their cost of their lives and their existence and their culture to integrate.
Of course not. And so that became your purpose, was to champion their rights.
Yes, eventually.
So your travelling with purpose, or your exploring with purpose, gradually became clearer to you as you went along. At the beginning, you were a young man testing your mettle, weren't you? You against the world, having an adventure. That's probably what it was all about, wasn't it? At the beginning, showing off.
That's what it's all about, really.
Yeah.
To begin with, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what young men,
how we learn.
Young girls and boys want to do.
They should do it more than they do.
And they should do it lots. But if they're lucky, as I was, the showing off can turn into a passion for a cause.
Yeah.
Which in my case was indigenous rights and the environment.
Yeah, which is why you started...
Survival International.
Yeah, which is still going strong.
Very much so.
And you raise a lot of money for it over the decades, haven't you?
Yes.
I heard you the other day on an interview saying that it's although a lot of the world is very depressing and sometimes you feel like you're shouting, into a void, the fact that the indigenous people were represented at COP was a huge advancement, wasn't it? It was a great, it means progress. If they were there, their voices are being heard.
I think it's the most important thing that we've done over the 55 years since survival was started, is to change public perception. I mean, back in 1969, when we started it, it was pretty well accepted that, indigenous people, primitive people, were doomed to be wiped out because the mass grind of civilization was going to sweep over them, and they had nothing much to contribute. I think what has changed is that people are now very aware that indigenous knowledge has a huge amount to teach us. We've got it wrong in the way that we treat the planet.
Yeah.
We have scraped the planet bare so that there's not much soil left and we've only got 10 harvests and so on. I mean, climate change is now suddenly coming home to roost in a big way. We didn't know about that in the early days. But what really excites me is that at the COPs, and I was at the Glasgow one of the 4 criteria for trying to save the world from climate change is to listen to indigenous knowledge. That's hugely exciting for me because it's right and makes sense.
And did they people listen to them? I mean, was it just sort of posturing? Yes, lip service. Or do you think
greenwashing? There's a lot of that, but I think it is now built into the thinking of the United Nations and the environment agencies and the big international conservation bodies that indigenous knowledge should be respected and should be part of the answer.
Would you have said that that first trip you did was the sort of springboard that launched your career, I suppose, as a explorer?
Yes. I mean, I did actually come back from that one and give a lecture at the Royal Geographical Society, at the end of which I rather pompously announced that my exploring career was over and I was now going to become a serious farmer down in Cornwall, and which I tried to do for a year. And then I read an article about some incredible rock paintings that had been discovered in the Sahara, and I couldn't resist. And I went on my own, spent a couple of months on a camel with Tuareg.
Wow.
And developed the other sort of spirituality that you get from being alone in the desert under the stars. And rainforests and deserts, I sort of have managed throughout my life to kind of balance.
You have seen the world at its most beautiful. And
I'm very lucky. It's a Goldilocks era we've lived in. People of my age are very, very lucky to have lived between an era when there wasn't a war or major war.
But you also think big, don't you? Your horizons are enormous. You don't just do something on a small scale. You do it on you're a romantic and a dreamer, as well as being obviously quite practical, because if you're leading an expedition, I mean, does it take a long time? It takes a lot of organising, doesn't it?
Yes, but I remember when I wrote to Peter Scott and congratulated him on his knighthood many, many years ago, I got a charming letter back saying, "Don't you believe it? I have only one talent, and that is the art of delegation."
Is that your genius as well?
It's a talent.
So, what do you always take with you when you travel on these to these remote areas? What will you not leave home without?
There are many, many answers to that, which one can vary. But I think the most important one is a local.
A local?
Take a local, travel with a local, do what they do,
of course,
and do it like them. Take nothing.
Take nothing, travel light.
Travel light. Because the local knows it all. I mean, my great friend, Nyapun, who I've got a book, I hope, coming out next year that I'm writing jointly with Merlin, which is rather exciting, was a nomadic hunter-gatherer in Borneo who came out of the forest and became my best friend. And he took nothing with him in the forest and didn't need anything. And we travelled on lots of patrols together, and he would feed me, build a house, make a fire.
With his machete. He had a machete, didn't he?
He had a machete and a blowpipe and a little quiver with some poison darts in it.
Yeah.
That was virtually all he needed.
Are you a technophobe, or do you enjoy the whole GPS and all the stuff that the internet can give you nowadays?
I'm not a total technophobe, although I did rather famously after a lecture in the RGS, when somebody in the audience rather cheekily asked me what I thought about GPS. And I said it was the end of exploration, because the whole point of exploring was being lost, and you couldn't be lost anymore if you had a GPS. If you didn't have one, you were irresponsible because nobody knew where you were, and if you did have one, they could find you instantly, which rather spoilt the whole effect. So in that sense, I perhaps am a technophobe, but only in that sense. Yeah. I mean, one of these days, and it probably won't be very long, another Nostradamus forecast of mine is that a massive sunspot will wipe out all the satellites. And we will be in such trouble when there's no electricity, no technology, no mobile phones. I mean, within a couple of days, the world will be in complete chaos if we didn't have satellites and nobody was able to.
Yeah, but then we go back to the how it used to be.
But we're not capable of doing that anymore.
Are we not?
The only people are the indigenous people that survival works. Well, they get on all right, perfectly well. We'd be completely lost. We wouldn't know how to catch a rabbit and skin it and cook it. We wouldn't know how to feed ourselves.
We're clever. We'll teach ourselves.
Yeah, some would be, but there'd be pretty horrible things happening in the interim. I don't want it to happen, but I sort of...
I get worried when you start predicting things, because you did in your last book, and what happened? The Four Horsemen came.
Quite a lot of them are still happening.
Yeah.
A lot of very clever people, scientists, are forecasting some pretty nasty things that are going to happen if we don't pull ourselves together.
And are we pulling ourselves together?
Well,
slowly.
One has to be an optimist about it. I mean, we know what the answers are. We can do it all. I mean, trees are the great solution because they wonderfully absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. And that's what we all live on. And everybody recognizes that the cause of climate change is deforestation and burning fossil fuels. And you only have to stop doing those two things. You'll be halfway to a solution of a much better world. But economics and greed and war gets in the way.
I mean, it's so depressing. I mean, no wonder people suffer from existential angst. You know, do you? You don't seem to. You look like a person who has...
I don't really care anymore.
Do you not?
Well, because, I mean, I've been there. I've looked into the abyss and come out of it. And when you've done that, you know, you've been given a second chance. You might as well enjoy it instead of worrying too much.
So your third act is to actually, it's galvanized you to just take every day and enjoy each moment for what it is.
And also, you know, just urge people to try and do the right thing and keep carrying on.
I asked you earlier why, since you've achieved so much and having had this close shave with death, why you don't just enjoy, I mean, relax, put your feet up, pull up the drawbridge.
It's very boring. I mean, boredom, I think, is one of the worst things to endure. No, I couldn't do that. But I don't necessarily, I'm not driven to change the world certainly not by physical things anymore. Although, you know, one meets the challenges.
On your 80th birthday, you set yourself 8...
Well, I've always looked much younger than I was.
Certainly do.
And I enjoyed that and got away with it. You know, 50s, 60s, 70s. I was still relatively fit and enjoying that and all that. 80, you can't pretend you're still young. So when I entered my 80th year, I was really pissed off, and I thought, this isn't funny anymore. I got to do something to spit in the face of fate. And so I thought I'd do 8 silly things and raise £80,000 for survival as a little challenge. 8 challenges, starting with the London Marathon, which, having not broken out of a trot since I was at school, was a bit of a challenge. I didn't do much training, and it was pretty unpleasant, but wonderful experience because one was buoyed up by all the people. And that's what set the ball going, and started raising the money. And then I climbed the 4 highest mountains and did a skydive. What can go wrong?
No.
And went through the deepest cave in Britain, which was very unpleasant and very difficult. Less people have done that than been to the moon. But of course, immediately you do something like that, like expeditions, people say what you're going to do next, and you have to come up with something.
Yeah, you have to come up with something for your 90th.
So I then climbed Brown Willie and raised 150,000 for Cornwall's Healing Hospital. And now next year's my 90th year, and people are saying, what are you going to do for that? Well, come on, I'm on a stick, and I've got a bad foot, and I'm lame, and it would be very undignified to try and do any sort of great physical activity. But I have a little idea of what I might do in a rather gentle way, which is to row a nice old clinker boat with, you know, a few basic rations in the back.
Well, like a bottle of good wine.
A bottle of good wine would help, and a few sandwiches, and lots of honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note, and row across the English Channel, which, I mean, people have done. It's not that special. But an old man doing it slowly and with a certain amount of dignity might just capture the public imagination.
How do you keep so fit? I mean, you have a walking stick, but how do you, on a day-to-day basis, what is your routine?
Well, when I came out of hospital, I really couldn't walk at all. And then somebody lent us a mobility scooter, which I never thought I'd use. And Luella and I devised a wonderful way of getting fit using that, as I would ride along and she'd walk behind, holding on, and then coming back, she would ride it and I would walk behind, which meant that we got something to hold on to, a sort of. And I now have 2 mobility scooters and have races with other friends who are in the same tradition.
That's hilarious.
But it means that I get out and then walk back. But it gets me out into the country. It's cross-country. It's good fun, bouncing around. But I'm not very fit, not like I was. I used to be very fit.
And
But,
you enjoyed that sensation of your body working.
And it's boring when, in old age, your body begins to let you down.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
boring.
inevitable. I mean, it's going to happen.
It's got to
Going to
happen.
stop one of these days.
Of course, we've got to somehow let go of this wonderful world and say goodbye to
Yeah.
it at some stage.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's a way of letting us...
Tant pis.
Yeah, it's going to happen, I agree. But in the meantime, we're going to have a very lovely time enjoying what is left, I hope.
Yeah.
Don't you?
But
what are the good things about getting older? I mean, you talked about it's boring, obviously, when your body starts to not work in the way it used to. What do you enjoy about these later years, your 80s?
I think I enjoy just enjoying the countryside. I'm very lucky to live in beautiful countryside. I mean, I would be very unhappy living in a flat in an urban environment. So I've got that to enjoy. And it's very nice to look at one's children and grandchildren and just actually be there. I always had a sort of dream in the back of my mind that I'd end up rather fat, like a Buddha, under a banyan tree, being wise and telling everybody what to do. I mean, I'm not very wise. I just happen to have led an amusing life. But I like holding forth and I like writing about it. And
how do you, when you're on traveling the world, and you've been to so many different countries, and what always strikes you about humankind? Is it the fact that we're all very similar? We all want the same
oh,
things?
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we in the West are very spoiled and think we know it all and are rather superior about people with bones through their noses or primitive habits or whatever. And as I've said, I mean, we're wrong about that. But it's very difficult for us to actually accept that we are all the same species. And although we may look a little different, we are basically the same. And I sort of learnt this the hard way by spending a lot of time with such people and realizing that we have certain characteristics in common which are fundamental to the human condition, probably the most important of which is a sense of humour.
Of course.
Everybody has a sense of humour. It's a universal thing. And if you can make people laugh, they know you're not a threat and an enemy and to be hated. And I've sort of been moderately good at that.
How do you make someone laugh, actually? How do you break the ice?
Well, it depends who you're with, but I mean, with South American Indians, for instance, many, many tribes that I've spent time with various states of contact, and particularly the sort of lesser contact people are very suspicious of you, and because most people they've met have thought the only good Indian's a dead Indian and shoot and rape and pillage. So I had a little trick that I used to do with a lot of people, which was to enter very quietly, and they don't greet each other with hello and handshakes and a lot of enthusiasm. So you just come in very quietly and sit in the corner and let them get used to the idea that you're there. And there's a little cliche that I usually have a few balloons about my person, and the children will come and gather round with big wide eyes and look at you and say, who is this strange thing? And you look back, and then very quietly, a huge blue thing will appear out of your mouth and go back in again. And they'll say, look, and the parents watch. You blow a big balloon up and tie it up and give it to them and they play with it. Now, you can't be a bad person if you're mad enough to be doing that. That's sort of a little trick I used to have. And the other characteristic, which is universal and, again, terribly important to be aware of, both as a recipient and a donor, is hospitality. I believe that it's one of the basic human instincts. If you accept hospitality, people will always be hospitable if you throw yourself on their mercy and don't make yourself superior and different and, we've got all our food, thank you very much, and we've got guns that shoot and things like that. But just immerse yourself into a society. Eat what they offer you with gusto, however disgusting it may look, because it's always good. I mean, they're living on it, for heaven's sake. It's nutritious. I've only got one absolute principle in life, which there is absolutely nothing
that you won't eat
if I'm offered it by my host, who says it's good.
Well done, you.
And is eating it themselves. And it makes life so much easier.
Yeah. Actually, imagining your what you'd be eating at your Last Supper, for instance. Let's imagine that very, very sadly, you're only going to be allowed to eat this one supper. What would you put on your table? What would you serve?
I've never thought about that. I know it's one of those questions one gets asked. I don't think I'd have anything very exotic. I'd have poached eggs probably. Just something salmon, something simple like that. Why push out? A few oysters actually would go down nicely if
And a glass of wine.
And several glasses of wine if one's allowed that.
And who would we be sitting around the table with in your ideal scenario?
Oh dear. Well, there are so many people that one would love to have around one's table. We were talking earlier about Robert Byron, the greatest travel writer, so evocative. I mean, his lovely moving piece that he wrote about If I Had a Son. He never did have a son. How he would teach him the names of all the wildflowers and the bees and everything.
Lovely.
He must have been a lovely man. I think Humboldt I would love to be with because he was such an enthusiast and had so many of all the explorers. I don't know. There's just so many. I would take it as it came, and I mean, what one would enjoy. The point is, everybody is interesting.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and that is that's why you're a traveller and an explorer, because everything is grist to your mill, everything is interesting.
Everything
your
is
curiosity is
good copy.
Yeah, that's right, good copy. Well, maybe no one is quite as interesting as you, Robin, so I'm very, very grateful to you for coming to talk to me today at Orions. Thank you very much.
I've loved it.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed listening to today's show, you can hear more episodes by clicking follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to this, or by looking for the Third Act podcast in your favourite search engine. This episode was produced by Pete Norton and made possible by Orions, luxurious residences that are redefining later living in the heart of Chelsea.